Okay, guys, hey, listen, if you haven't checked out the videos up to this point, it's fine. You can go ahead and watch this one. This one's it's not gonna be out of context if you just jump right in here. But I do encourage you to go back, watch the other parts to this, because this is just me unpacking a whole lot of stuff. Obviously, I couldn't do it in one video, and there's just so much there that I didn't want to just try to spit it out so fast that it didn't even make sense. But I wanted to really take my time, let us marinate on it, let us chew on these things, because this is very important things for this season. And we have to understand it. We have to know how to respond to it, and how it does challenge us. It does require some real tenacity and endurance and patience. But if we do that, if we keep pressing in and we keep pressing forward, God's going to do some crazy awesome things, okay? So I told you in the last video, I want to talk about the church of Laodicea. I want to talk about that particular church because we were talking about the flame of God and the fire of God, that the fire of God comes close to us, and how we respond to that fire, how we respond to God's closeness, that our God is a consuming fire, a jealous God. From Deuteronomy chapter 4, he says, he comes close, and we sometimes don't know how to respond to that. Sometimes we talked about the wood, hay, and the stubble, and the gold, silver, and precious stones. When you look at those things, the gold is purified because it's an eternal thing. It represents the eternal things. We see things from the flesh. We see things from the natural, but there is an eternal perspective that God sees. He desires the eternal things. We see only the 70 years that we're here on earth. God sees the eternal. So He's willing to take us through some hard times during these 70 years if it perfects and creates a greater fulfillment in our eternal destiny. And we have to see things that way. We have to have that vision for the future. We have to have that vision for eternity. And if we look so much to the temporary things and we fail to draw near to Him in the eternal things, we become like the wood, hay, and the stubble, and we start to draw back from the fire. I think about being near a fire. When it's cold outside, you see people just gather around. We built a fire right out here in the backyard just a few weeks ago, and it was just still a little bit chilly, and we had already entered this time of isolation, so we didn't have nothing else to do. We built a fire. We had a little pit, and we just gathered around, and nobody even said anything. It was so weird because we just sat there quiet, and we just sat there and just stared at the fire, and the warmth of the fire was just nice. And but one of the things my daughter said was that that my back's cold, so the back was cold, but the front was fired up and warm. And if you got too close, you would notice that everything was starting to just really heat up and warm up on your front side, and you'd still be a little bit chilly in the back. So if you got too hot on the front, you just kind of back up and draw back a little bit. And I think that's kind of where we are as a church. We, especially in the American church, I don't know, there's this culture in the American church that we draw close to God to a certain point, to a certain depth, and we feel that warmth, we feel that comfort of God's presence, but then we drift back enough so that we don't get too close and get burned. I think that's kind of dangerous because our God's a consuming fire, and it isn't that He wants to burn us, but He does want to burn away the things that can be burned away. We talked about a scripture this last session. It talked about that God's doing what God's doing right now on the earth is shaking everything that can be shaken and shaking loose those things that are shakeable, and making stronger the things that are unshakable. Right now, He's creating a church that's becoming unshakable because He's shaking loose a lot of things that we didn't need. A lot of extra stuff that we did not need in our churches. We didn't need in our fellowship, in our spiritual community, in our culture. We needed a pure lifestyle, a pure hunger for God, and God's creating that right now. I really believe that God's doing something really great, drawing us close to that flame and to that fire so that we can rest in that place of purity. So that the gold is those eternal things. The gold is unhindered by the fire. It's unaffected by the fire. It's only purified by the fire. And that's why I say we talk about being burned by the fire of God. But what's being burned away? It's just the flesh. You didn't need it anyway. You don't need that stuff. If you feel the pain, you feel that trial, that testing of it, the pain that you feel eating of the spiritual things, because those gold, the gold, silver, and precious stones are not being punished. I promise you, they are being purified. The things that are being torn away, the things that's really painful to us, are the fleshly things. It's the things that don't matter. It's the things that don't even affect the eternal weight of things. God is creating an eternal heaviness, an eternal weight of glory for our lives for a purpose. And He's doing that with His fire. He's doing that with His presence. Now, the church of Laodicea, I feel like that they had come to a place that they felt comfortable being near the fire, but not too close to get burned, not to see those things start to fall away. And they had developed this comfort. Now look at what it says. If you look at Revelation chapter 3, 15 through 21, that's going to give you kind of the idea of what's going on in this church. But one of the things that I think are really cool to point out was that he talks to this church about their works being neither hot nor cold, and that they've been in this kind of lukewarm. He says lukewarm, neither hot nor cold. And he said, because you're this way, because you're this kind of in between, you don't want to go back to the world. You don't want to really be away from the things of God. You want the things of God, but not too close that it makes you give up the things of the flesh, that it starts to burn away the things of the flesh. That's what he had a problem with. And he says, because you say that I am rich and have become wealthy and have need of nothing. Now look at what these people were saying. I am rich, I am wealthy, I have need of nothing. Who does that sound like? It sounds a lot like us. Just a few months ago when I left the state patrol, God spoke to me. One of the things that Wade said, hey man, I sat right here in my bedroom in my prayer time and just cried, just boo-hooed, because God showed me just how much I was living like a king and desiring to live that American dream in my life, where I could just live however I wanted to live, and just as long as I was doing things, for God, that I was good. And I'm not saying that you'll go to hell if you live that way. That's not what I'm saying. And I'm not saying you're not saved, but I'm saying you're living with a lesser pleasure of the eternal things of what God's called you to. Just making it to heaven is not what God's called us to. He is merciful. He is very gracious to those who seek the Lord for salvation, who seek the Lord for eternal security. But man, listen, there is a whole lot more passion, a whole lot more glory that we're going to miss out on, a whole lot more experience that we're going to miss out on for the eternal things, because we backed up and didn't allow God to really perfect those things that were lacking in our lives. So look at what he says. He says, you think because you're rich, you think because you're wealthy, you think because you got everything just right. But here's the way it really looks to me. This is through the eyes of the Spirit. This is through the eyes of the eternal God. Jesus looks at us and says, and you do not know that you are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. Now he's not just name calling there. He's not just saying you're wretched, you're poor, you're blind, you're naked. Listen, he's making a point that without me, the more you draw back, the more you go into the things of the flesh, the more you disconnect from the things of life and the eternal weighty things that are in my spirit, you look like this. You look like you're poor, you look like you're wretched, you look like you're blind. When you go back and you look at the Beatitudes, you think about how Jesus calls people to blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst. These are all things that look like they were negative issues. But God was calling you, saying, hey, there's a superior pleasure here. There's something that brings happiness. The people who do this, the people who are poor in spirit, are happy. Happy are those. Blessed are those who are poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of the heaven. When you think about if you watch how that's kind of progressive, it goes through where this person is poor. This person begins to mourn because of this poverty. They mourn because they realize how poor and wretched they are. This person, think about this. Go back and just think about how this verse flows in Matthew chapter 5, where it talks about these Beatitudes. It talks about poor in the spirit. He moves from poverty into mourning, and he desires something else. And then it says that the blessed are the meek, the people who humble themselves before God. The people who say, I am poor, I am needy, I am wretched. I need you, God. Those who humble themselves and seek after the things of God. Then it says those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Isn't that powerful? How progressive the blessedness is of what Matthew, when Jesus calls us up to the mountain, he calls us up to that place of higher living, eternal life, eternal living, that he says, blessed are those who are poor. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who humble themselves. And then the hungry. Oh man, if you don't have hunger, if you don't have a desire to go after the things of God, you cannot walk in blessedness. You cannot walk in a true superior pleasure in God, because where's the fullness? What are you full off of? Because we've been so full off of other things. We've been so full off of the world. We've been so full off of Facebook. We've been full off of YouTube. We've been full off of Netflix. We've been full off of all these things. We've been full off of social interaction, going out. We play golf. We go fishing. We do all these things. And it's not that any of those things are sin per se. But what are they? They are distractions that keep us from entering into the flame, to the fire, to the presence of God. We back up just enough where we can feel good about our spiritual life, but we don't want to see the perfection that God designed and wants us to walk in. God's called us to another season. He's called us to a whole new way of living. He's called us to the kingdom of heaven. He's called us to walk in those places, walk in those higher places, that we see things from an eternal perspective and not just the short-sighted natural perspective. And when we start to enter into those things, God's going to shake off those things. When you look at Laodicea, you see how he says, I counsel you to buy gold refined by the fire. What do you think that is? What do you think that gold refined by the fire is? It's the eternal things that God has called us to. It's the eternal things that he can perfect through his passion, through his consuming fire, through his flaming relationship that he wants to have with you. Look what he says. In verse 19, he says, as many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. Now that's, we've talked about the chastening of the Lord, the what some people call the judgment of the Lord. I look at it as, man, the love of God redirecting our path to take us off of something that's inferior and bringing us back to something superior. Bring us back to something eternal rather than leaving us on a path that just leads to 70 years of nothing. Absolutely nothing. Everything you do in this life, everything you do in 70 years, everything you do in the flesh is going to burn away. It's going to be gone the day you die. The day you check out, it's all gone. You lose every bit of it. But the things you start to weigh in on, the things you start to press in on, the things you start to invest in that are eternal, you'll never lose. The day you check out here is the day you check in there. And you start to, everything you're investing in for these 70 years, you inherit the day you check out here. Man, listen, we don't have time to be warmed by the fire. We've got to enter into the fire. We've got to enter into a hot, white hot relationship. And yeah, there's times it's uncomfortable. The fire is uncomfortable. There's a purity, there's a holiness that you'll feel in the spiritual things that the gold is not touched by the fire. The silver is not touched by the fire. It is purified by the fire. It's not pain. It's not pain. It's not anguish. Listen, right now, this is a crisis. This is a hard time for a lot of people. Right now, I don't feel that way. Man, I feel excited. I feel on fire. I feel fervent. I feel like this is, even though it's a challenging time, I feel fervent about it. I feel on fire about it. I feel like that God's doing something great. Man, I'm not just trying to survive. Man, I am thriving in this season. And you should be thriving in this season. There's a lot of you guys, you are. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Your spirit's firing off. Just me saying this. You know that it's the truth. You know that I'm speaking exactly what God's heart is. You know that right now this season is burning in your spirit just like it's burning in mine. Then Jesus says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and dine with him. What's that sound like he wants to do? He wants you to draw near. He wants to draw near because he wants to be close to you. He just wants to spend time with you. He wants to sit at the table with you. He wants to talk to you. He wants to spend time. He wants to talk. He wants to enjoy you. He wants you to enjoy him. But man, we got to let go of so many things. We've got to enter into perfection. Man, I love you guys. Press in. Pour out your spirit. go into the deep things of God. Be blessed.